The first time, I thought I'd forgotten my own grandson's birthday. I cried. Not because I missed the party. Because I'd remembered that date. Every single year. For 23 years. My daughter-in-law hugged me. "It's okay, Frank. It happens." My son nodded. "We've all been worried about your memory." That sentence changed everything. Because until that moment, I didn't know anyone was worried. My name is Frank Donnelly. I'm 72 years old. For 38 years, I worked as a pharmacist. Thousands of prescriptions. Thousands of patients. If there was one thing I understood, it was medication. After my wife, Helen, passed away, I stayed in the house we built together. My son, Brian, visited every weekend. His wife, Emily, came too. She was organized, helpful, always smiling. When she offered to organize my medications, I thanked her. "It'll make life easier," she said. And honestly, she was right. Every Sunday, she filled my weekly pill organizer. Every morning, I simply opened the next compartment. About 2 months later, something strange started happening. I'd walk into a room and forget why I was there. I'd lose track of conversations. Sometimes, I'd wake up exhausted, even after sleeping 10 hours. I blamed my age. Then one afternoon, Emily stopped by unexpectedly. She looked concerned. "Frank, have you noticed you're becoming forgetful?" The question caught me off guard. A little. She sighed. I didn't want to say anything. "But Brian has noticed too." That hurt. Not because of what she said. Because my own son hadn't said it himself. A week later, Brian suggested we meet with a neurologist. It could be nothing. We just want to be safe. For the first time in my life, I felt afraid of my own mind. But deep down, something didn't feel right. I'd spent nearly 4 decades identifying medications by sight alone. Yet somehow, I hadn't looked closely at the pills I'd been swallowing every single day. That mistake was about to change everything. The neurologist couldn't see me for 6 weeks. Emily insisted that was too long. "We shouldn't wait. What if it gets worse?" She sounded genuinely concerned. At least, I thought she did. The following Monday, she arrived carrying 2 grocery bags. "I picked up everything you like. Soup, fresh fruit, coffee." She unpacked everything while I sat at the kitchen table. Then she reached for my pill organizer. "I'll refill this while I'm here." For some reason, I watched more closely than usual. She worked quickly. Too quickly. 1 bottle. Another bottle. Then, a small white bottle I'd never noticed before. "What medication is that?" Emily looked up. "Oh, your new vitamin." "I don't remember my doctor prescribing a vitamin." She smiled. "He recommended it after your blood work. It helps with memory." That answer should have reassured me. Instead, it bothered me. After she left, I walked into my home office. Inside the bottom drawer, I kept every medical record I'd ever received. Lab reports, prescription printouts, doctor's notes. I found the paperwork from my last appointment. There wasn't a single mention of a vitamin. Maybe she'd confused me with someone else. That was the logical explanation. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. Instead of swallowing my pills immediately, I poured them into my hand. 5 pills. 4 of them were familiar. The 5th, a small white tablet, wasn't. I turned it over. Tiny black letters were stamped into one side. The imprint looked familiar. Painfully familiar. But I couldn't remember why. That frightened me more than anything. For 38 years, I'd identified medications by nothing more than their shape and imprint. Now, I was staring at one, and drawing a blank. Maybe Emily was right. Maybe I really was losing my memory. I placed the pill back into the organizer. Then, without really knowing why, I slipped it into my shirt pocket instead. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Brian. "Dad? Did you take your medication this morning?" The question caught me off guard. He'd never asked that before. "Yes," I lied. There was a brief silence. Then he said, "Good. Emily worries when you forget." After we hung up, I looked at the white tablet still resting in my pocket. If it really was just a vitamin, why had lying about taking it made me feel safer? I didn't throw the pill away. I wrapped it in a tissue, slipped it into my wallet, and took the rest of my medication. All morning, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe Emily really had bought a vitamin. But one question refused to leave me alone. Why hadn't my doctor mentioned it? That afternoon, I drove to the pharmacy where I'd worked before retiring. Most of the staff had changed, but one familiar face was still behind the counter. Sarah. She'd worked beside me for nearly 15 years. The moment she saw me, she smiled. "Frank, I was wondering when you'd stop by." We talked for a few minutes. Grandchildren, retirement, the weather. Then I quietly placed the white tablet on the counter. "Can you identify this for me?" She picked it up, turned it over, then looked at me. "Where did you get this?" My stomach tightened. "Why?" "Because this isn't a vitamin." She walked over to the computer, typed in the imprint code. A few seconds later, she frowned. "Frank, this is a prescription sedative. It can cause drowsiness, confusion, and memory problems." For a moment, I couldn't hear anything else. My ears were ringing. "Are you sure?" She turned the monitor toward me. The name matched the imprint exactly. I read it twice, then a third time. "I've never been prescribed this." Sarah looked genuinely concerned. "Who gave it to you?" I hesitated. I'm not sure." That wasn't entirely true. I knew exactly who had put it in my pill organizer. I just wasn't ready to believe it. Sarah lowered her voice. "Frank, if someone is giving you medication without a prescription, that's serious." I nodded slowly. Before leaving, I asked one more question. "If I stopped taking it today, how long before I started feeling normal again?" She thought for a moment. "A few days. Maybe a week." Then she added something that stayed with me. "If your memory suddenly improves, you'll have your answer." I drove home in silence. The white pill was back in my wallet. I had proof that someone had been giving me medication I didn't need, but I still didn't know why. When I pulled into my driveway, Emily's car was already there. She was standing on my porch, holding my pill organizer. The moment she saw me, she smiled. Then she asked a question that made my blood run cold. "Frank, did you forget to take your morning pill today?" For a second, I just stared at her. Emily stood on the porch holding the pill organizer, waiting, watching. The question sounded casual, but it didn't feel casual. "No, I took it." The lie came easily this time. She smiled. "Good. I was worried." Worried. The word echoed in my head all afternoon. Not because of what she'd said. Because of how quickly she'd asked it. She hadn't asked how I was. She hadn't asked where I'd been. She hadn't asked if I needed anything. The first thing she wanted to know was whether I'd taken that pill. That night, I didn't take it. The next morning, I skipped it again. By the third day, something strange happened. I woke up before my alarm. Clear-headed. Alert. For the first time in months, I felt like myself. I balanced my checkbook, finished a crossword puzzle, even remembered the name of a customer I'd helped 20 years earlier. The fog was lifting, and that terrified me. Because Sarah had been right. If my memory improved after stopping the medication, then the medication was the problem. On Friday evening, Brian stopped by. Emily wasn't with him. For the first time in weeks, I had a chance to talk to my son alone. We sat in the living room, watched a baseball game, talked about nothing important. Then Brian muted the television. "Dad, Emily and I have been discussing something." My stomach tightened. "What?" He hesitated. "The house." I looked around. The same house I'd shared with Helen for 43 years. "What about it?" Brian leaned forward. "Maybe it's time to think about downsizing." There it was. The conversation I'd been expecting. "I'm doing fine here." "I know. But if your memory keeps getting worse, it might not be safe." Memory. Again. Every conversation somehow returned to my memory. Then Brian said something that stopped me cold. "We've already looked at a few assisted living communities." "Already?" "Not maybe. Not someday. Already." I forced myself to stay calm. "When did you start looking?" Brian glanced away. "A couple months ago." A couple months ago. The same time Emily had started organizing my medication. For the first time, a terrible possibility formed in my mind. What if the medication wasn't the goal? What if the goal was proving I needed it? I didn't sleep much that night. Every piece of the puzzle seemed to fit a little too well. Emily starts organizing my medication. A few weeks later, my memory begins failing. Then Brian starts talking about assisted living. Maybe it was all a coincidence. But pharmacists don't survive 38 years by believing in coincidences. The next morning, I called my family doctor, not the neurologist, my regular physician. The receptionist squeezed me in before lunch. When the nurse asked why I was there, I simply said, "I'd like to review every medication I'm currently prescribed." 20 minutes later, Dr. Collins walked into the room carrying my file. "Frank, everything all right?" "I hope you're the one who can answer that." I emptied my wallet onto his desk. The white tablet rolled across the paperwork. His expression changed immediately. "Where did this come from?" "I was hoping you'd tell me." He opened my medical records, checked my prescription history, then checked it again. "I've never prescribed this. Neither has anyone else in this clinic." My heart sank. "So it isn't a mistake?" "No, it isn't." He leaned back in his chair. "Frank, has anyone else been managing your medication?" I nodded. "My daughter-in-law." He was quiet for several seconds. "I'm not accusing anyone. But I need you to answer honestly. Has your memory improved since you stopped taking this?" "Yes. Every day." He closed the file. "I'd like to run a few cognitive tests." "The same tests they usually give patients suspected of early dementia." 25 minutes later, he smiled. "You missed one question. Out of 40. I blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means your cognitive function is excellent." He slid the results across the desk. "Nothing here suggests dementia." For the first time in weeks, I could breathe again. I wasn't losing my mind. Someone had made me believe I was. As I stood to leave, Dr. Collins stopped me. "Frank, Until you know exactly what's happening. Don't tell anyone you stopped taking those pills. I looked at him. Why? Because if someone is doing this intentionally, the moment they know you've figured it out, they'll change their behavior. I nodded slowly. He was right. If I wanted the truth, I couldn't let Emily know that the fog had already lifted. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw Brian's truck parked outside. Both he and Emily were waiting for me. Emily smiled warmly. Then she held up a folder. "We've got some paperwork for you to sign." I forced myself to smile. What kind of paperwork? Emily walked into the kitchen and placed the folder on the table. "Nothing complicated. It's just so we can help if your memory gets worse." Brian nodded. "It'll make things easier later." Later. That word bothered me. They weren't talking about helping me today. They were preparing for a future where I couldn't make my own decisions. Emily opened the folder. I highlighted the places where you need to sign. Highlighted. Not explained. I adjusted my glasses and looked down. The first page was a medical authorization. Reasonable. The second was a financial power of attorney. My eyes stopped there. It gave Brian complete authority over my bank accounts, investments, and property, if I was declared mentally incompetent. Normally, that wouldn't concern me. Many families prepare documents like this. But timing matters. And suddenly, the timing felt very convenient. Emily pointed to the signature line. "If we get everything done now, you won't have to worry later." I looked up. "You seem very certain my memory is going to get worse." For the first time, her smile faded. "We're just being prepared." I nodded slowly. Then I did exactly what Dr. Collins had hoped I would do. I acted confused. "Oh, I don't really understand all these legal words. Maybe I should have someone explain them first." Emily answered before Brian could speak. "There's really nothing to explain. It's standard paperwork." I scratched my head. You know me. I've always read everything before I signed it. Brian laughed awkwardly. "Dad, you're overthinking it." "Maybe. Or maybe. I was finally thinking clearly. I'll take a day or two. Just to look everything over." Emily's expression tightened for only a second. Most people wouldn't have noticed. I did. Of course. No rush. But there was a rush. I could hear it in her voice. After they left, I didn't read the documents. I drove straight to an attorney's office. Margaret Lawson had handled Helen's estate when she passed away. She still remembered me. 20 minutes later, she was turning the pages one by one. Finally, she removed her glasses. "Frank, these documents aren't unusual. But I wouldn't sign them." "Why not?" "Because they're written to give your son immediate authority if a physician declares you mentally impaired." I frowned. "One physician?" She nodded. "One." My stomach dropped. Brian already believed I was developing dementia. Emily had been the one convincing him. And they already had an appointment with a neurologist. Margaret closed the folder. Then she asked a question I hadn't considered. "Frank, who benefits the most if everyone believes you're losing your memory?" I couldn't answer Margaret's question. Not yet. Because the answer was too painful to consider. My own son? Or Emily? Margaret slid the folder back across her desk. "Don't sign anything. And don't confront them. I've seen families destroy evidence because someone asked one question too early." I nodded. That seemed to be everyone's advice. Stay quiet. Watch. Wait. As I stood to leave, Margaret stopped me. "Frank, has anyone besides Emily had access to your medications?" I thought about it. No. She fills the organizer every Sunday. And where do you keep the prescription bottles? In the kitchen cabinet. Locked? I slowly shook my head. For the first time, I realized how much trust I'd placed in someone else. That evening, I emptied every prescription bottle onto the dining room table. One by one, I counted the tablets. Everything matched the refill dates, except one bottle. My blood pressure medication. According to the label, I should have had 23 tablets left. I counted 19. 4 pills were missing. At first, I assumed I'd miscounted. Then I looked closer. The tablets inside weren't even the same shape I'd been taking for years. A cold feeling spread through my chest. The pharmacy hadn't changed manufacturers. I knew that because I'd picked up the refill myself. Someone had opened the bottle. Someone had replaced some of the tablets. I drove straight back to Sarah. She compared one of the tablets with the pharmacy's stock. They're different. The bottle is yours. But these pills aren't. She checked the imprint. Then looked up at me. This isn't blood pressure medication. It's another sedative. I closed my eyes. This wasn't an accident anymore. Someone had switched my medication. Twice. Sarah lowered her voice. Frank, I think you need to involve the police. I don't have proof. You have altered medication. That's proof something happened. I slipped the bottle into my jacket. I need one more answer first. What answer? Whether Brian knows. That night, I called my son. Would you like to have dinner tomorrow? Just the two of us. He sounded surprised. Sure. What about Emily? I looked at the altered prescription bottle sitting on the kitchen counter. Not this time. There was a long silence. Then Brian quietly asked, Did something happen? I took a slow breath. That's exactly what I'm hoping to find out. The next evening, Brian arrived alone. That surprised me. Normally, Emily never missed a family dinner. We ate in silence for a while. Just like we used to. Pot roast. Mashed potatoes. The same meal Helen used to make every Sunday. Finally, Brian put his fork down. Dad? What's going on? I looked at him for several seconds. Then I asked the question that had been haunting me. When did you first think I had dementia? He frowned. I didn't. I blinked. What do you mean? It was Emily. She noticed you repeating stories. She said you were forgetting appointments. Then she started writing everything down. What things? Brian pulled out his phone. He opened a folder of notes. Every page had a date, a time, and a short description. Frank forgot where he parked. Frank asked the same question twice. Frank almost took the wrong pills. There were dozens of entries. Brian looked at me. I didn't notice these things myself. But after Emily pointed them out, I started believing her. I slowly nodded. That made sense. Once someone convinces you to look for a problem, you start seeing it everywhere. Then I asked another question. Who suggested assisted living? Brian looked down. Emily. And the power of attorney? Another pause. Emily. For the first time that evening, I didn't see a man trying to deceive me. I saw a son who genuinely believed he was protecting his father. Brian, I need you to answer one last question. Anything. Has Emily ever been alone with my medications? He answered immediately. Every Sunday. Then he frowned. Why? Instead of answering, I stood up, walked into the kitchen, and returned with the prescription bottle. I placed it on the table. Those pills aren't mine. Brian picked up the bottle. He looked confused. What are you talking about? I had them tested. They're sedatives. Not blood pressure medication. His face went completely blank. He looked from the bottle to me, then back again. That's impossible. I wish it was. He pushed his chair back so quickly it nearly tipped over. Without another word, he grabbed his keys. "Brian, where are you going?" His hand was already on the front door. "I'm going home. Because my wife is about to answer a lot of questions." Brian didn't call that night. He didn't answer my calls either. I barely slept. Part of me feared I'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe I'd destroyed my son's marriage. Based on a misunderstanding. At 7:18 the next morning, my phone rang. It was Brian. "Dad? Can you come over?" His voice was different. Flat. Exhausted. "I'll be there in 20 minutes." When I arrived, Emily's car was gone. Brian was sitting alone on the back patio. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. Before I could speak, he placed 3 orange prescription bottles on the table. "I found these." My heart began to race. They were hidden in Emily's desk. I picked one up. The label had been peeled off. Another still had part of the pharmacy sticker attached. None of the names belonged to Emily. "What did she say?" Brian laughed bitterly. "At first, she denied everything. Then she said they belonged to a client. Then she said she'd forgotten they were there. Every 5 minutes, the story changed." He rubbed his face with both hands. Then I asked her one question. "What question?" "Why was she so determined to prove you had dementia?" I held my breath. "What did she say?" Brian stared into the backyard. "Nothing. She just packed a suitcase and left." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, Brian looked at me. "Dad, I'm so sorry." There was no defense. No excuses. Just regret. "I should have trusted you. I kept believing every note she wrote. Every story she told." I put a hand on his shoulder. "You believed someone you loved. So did I." Then something caught my eye. On the patio table, next to the prescription bottles, was a manila envelope. Brian followed my gaze. "I almost forgot. I found that too." Inside were printed emails, bank statements, and handwritten notes. One page was titled, "Frank, Transition Plan." I felt the blood drain from my face. Because under that title, someone had written a timeline. Step by step, month by month, for moving me out of my own home. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. The first page looked almost professional. Bullet points, dates, checklists. It wasn't someone's random thoughts. It was a plan. At the top, someone had typed, "Objective, ensure smooth transition of Frank Reynolds into assisted living while minimizing resistance." Resistance. Not comfort. Not care. Resistance. My hands became cold. The checklist continued. Phase 1. Establish documented memory decline. Phase 2. Encourage financial oversight by family. Phase 3. Obtain durable power of attorney. Phase 4. Sell primary residence. I couldn't breathe. Brian leaned forward. "Dad, I swear I've never seen this before." I believed him. His shock wasn't an act. Then I reached the last page. Attached with a paperclip was a printed email. The sender wasn't Emily. It was someone named Karen Mitchell. The subject line read, "Estate Planning Strategy." I frowned. "Who's Karen?" Brian answered immediately. "Emily's aunt." She owns an estate planning company. I kept reading. One sentence made my stomach turn. Once Frank is declared mentally incompetent, liquidation of the property should proceed quickly before outside relatives become involved. Liquidation. They weren't talking about helping me. They were talking about selling my home. The home Helen and I had spent 43 years paying for. Brian stood up so abruptly his chair scraped across the patio. "I'm calling the police." I gently raised my hand. "Not yet." He stared at me. "Why not?" "Because right now, we have documents. But we don't know who wrote them. We don't know who actually switched my medication. And we don't know how many people are involved." Brian slowly sat back down. "So what do we do?" I looked at the envelope. Then at the prescription bottles. Then at my son. We stopped guessing. We let professionals handle it. That afternoon, Margaret arranged a meeting with detectives from the county sheriff's office. We handed over everything. The altered medication. The hidden prescription bottles. The emails. The transition plan. The detective examined the paperwork for several minutes. Then he looked directly at me. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm very glad you came before signing those documents." I frowned. What would have happened? He closed the folder. "If this plan had worked, you might never have gotten your life back." The detective wasn't trying to frighten me. I could tell by his voice. He'd seen cases like this before. He opened the folder again. "This isn't just about forged medication. It's about intent. If someone deliberately altered your mental state, while preparing legal documents that transferred control of your finances, that's something we take very seriously." For the first time since Helen died, I realized how close I'd come to losing everything. Not because of old age. Not because of illness. Because I trusted the wrong person. The detective asked Brian to step outside for a few minutes. When the door closed, he leaned toward me. "Mr. Reynolds, I need to ask something difficult." "Go ahead." "If this investigation confirms what these documents suggest, are you willing to testify against your daughter-in-law?" I looked down at my hands. 3 years earlier, those same hands had helped Brian hang wedding lights in the backyard. I'd welcomed Emily into our family. I'd told everyone. I couldn't have asked for a better daughter. Now, I had to decide whether I was willing to help build a criminal case against her. I closed my eyes. Then I answered. "If she did this, then she didn't just betray me. She betrayed my son." "Yes, I'll testify." The detective nodded once. "Thank you." Over the next 2 weeks, investigators collected pharmacy records, security footage, and prescription histories. Sarah gave a formal statement. Dr. Collins submitted my medical records, including the cognitive assessment showing no signs of dementia. Margaret provided copies of every document Emily had asked me to sign. The evidence kept growing. Then, the detective called. "We found something." Brian and I drove to the sheriff's office immediately. The detective placed a photograph on the table. It was taken from a pharmacy security camera. Emily stood at the consultation counter. She wasn't filling one of my prescriptions. She was asking detailed questions about medications that caused confusion, memory impairment, and excessive drowsiness. The pharmacist had refused to dispense anything without a prescription. But the detective had also recovered emails showing Emily later contacted an online supplier claiming the medication was for an elderly relative. Brian covered his face with both hands. He wasn't crying. He looked empty. I kept defending her. I thought I was protecting my father. But all along, I was helping the person hurting him. I put my hand on his shoulder. "This isn't your burden to carry alone." The detective interrupted us. "There's one more thing." He slid another document across the table. It was Emily's internet search history. One search stood out above all the others. "How long does it take to declare an elderly parent mentally incompetent?" The room fell silent. At that moment, there was no longer any doubt. This hadn't been a misunderstanding. It had been a plan from the very beginning. 3 months later, the investigation was over. Emily accepted a plea agreement after prosecutors confronted her with the evidence. The altered medication, the emails, the written transition plan, and the online searches painted the same picture. She admitted she'd been trying to convince everyone, including Brian, that I was no longer capable of living alone. Her attorney argued she believed she was planning for the future. The prosecutor disagreed. Planning for someone's future doesn't involve secretly drugging them. It doesn't involve replacing prescription medication. And it certainly doesn't involve creating paperwork designed to take control of another person's life. Emily received probation, lost her professional license, and was permanently barred from serving in any fiduciary role involving vulnerable adults. For many people, that punishment would have felt too small. Maybe it was. But revenge had stopped mattering to me long before the case ended. What mattered was getting my life back. Brian filed for divorce 2 weeks later. He didn't ask me what he should do. He already knew. The hardest part wasn't losing his marriage. It was accepting that the woman he'd loved had used his trust against both of us. For months, he blamed himself. "I should have seen it. I should have listened to you." Every time, I gave him the same answer. "No. You believed your wife. That isn't weakness. That's what marriage is supposed to be." The fault belonged to the person who abused that trust. 6 months after the investigation ended, Brian came to my house carrying a toolbox. "What are you fixing?" He smiled for the first time in a long while. "Whatever you need." That weekend, we repaired the old fence Helen had always wanted replaced. The following weekend, we repainted the porch. A month later, we planted flowers in the front yard. Slowly, without ever talking about forgiveness, we earned it. One afternoon, while we were cleaning out the garage, Brian found Helen's old photo albums. We sat on the floor for nearly 2 hours, looking at birthdays, camping trips, Christmas mornings. Finally, Brian looked at one picture of all 3 of us. "I almost lost this family." I closed the album gently. "No, you almost lost yourself. But you came back." A few weeks later, Dr. Collins repeated the same cognitive test he'd given me months before. This time, I answered every single question correctly. He smiled. "I told you before. There was nothing wrong with your mind." I smiled back. "There wasn't. I'd just forgotten one thing." "What's that?" "Even the people you love should never be trusted blindly." Today, my medications stay in a locked cabinet. I manage every prescription myself. Brian has a spare key to my house. But he doesn't have access to my finances. Not because I don't trust him. Because trust and accountability can exist together. If this experience taught me anything, it's that growing older doesn't mean giving up your independence. Ask questions. Read every document. Know every medication you take. And never let anyone convince you that protecting yourself means you don't love your family. Because the people who truly love you will never ask you to stop protecting yourself. If you were in my position, what would have been the moment that made you realize something was wrong? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoy stories that reveal hidden family betrayals, subscribe for more. You never know. The next story might change the way you see the people closest to you.